Welcome. A little background for context. I've been married to Dan for about 8 years. Things haven't been picture perfect, but I thought we were doing okay. The usual ups and downs lately. Though Dan's been acting really weird, distant, secretive, and glued to his phone. My mind immediately went to the worst possible scenario. He's planning to leave me. I convinced myself that all the signs were there. He'd come home late, barely talked to me about his day, and was always whispering on the phone like he was planning something big without me. Last month was particularly tough. He started having these long business meetings, and every time I asked about them, he just brushed me off or changed the subject. One day, I overheard him talking about making it the best ever and needing it to be perfect before telling her. I mean, come on, what would you think? So, yeah, I panicked. I thought he was plotting his grand exit out of our marriage. I was scared of being left alone, financially unstable, and single in my late 30s. So, I did what I thought I needed to do to protect myself. I started looking for someone new, someone who would be there when Dan dropped his bombshell. Enter Cadden, charming, successful, and totally interested in me. We met at a friend's party, and things escalated quickly. He was everything I thought I needed to cushion the blow when my marriage inevitably ended. We started seeing each other, and I was careful, or so I thought. The day it all came crashing down was actually supposed to be a normal day. Dan had been extra sneaky that week, and I was sure D-Day was coming. He told me he had to run out for a few last-minute work things, but he seemed almost excited. It didn't make sense until later. I invited Caden over, thinking Dan would be gone for hours. We were just getting comfortable when suddenly, I hear the front door. Dan never came home early. Never. There he was, standing in the doorway with a look of shock I'll never forget. He wasn't alone. He had brought his sister, who was supposedly helping him with his work project. Turns out the project was planning a surprise party for my upcoming birthday. They were bringing in supplies and decorations he had been hiding at his sister's place. The look of betrayal and hurt on his face was something I had never seen before. Dan looked from me to Cadden, who was awkwardly trying to cover up, and then back to me. Everything was out in the open, and suddenly, all his secretive behaviors made sense. The worst part. Amidst the chaos, Dan threw the party invitations at me. They were all written out, and he'd even planned a trip for us to Bali. Something I'd mentioned wanting years ago. Dan left with his sister that day, and I haven't seen him since. He won't answer my calls, and honestly, I don't blame him. I've tried explaining through texts and voicemails, telling him about my fears and insecurities that led me here. But it sounds so selfish when I actually say it out loud. I destroyed our marriage because I jumped to conclusions and let my insecurities dictate my actions. I know I'm the villain in this story, and I'm not looking for sympathy. I guess I just needed to confess, to tell someone about this mess. I'm not sure where to go from here, but I know I have a lot of soul-searching to do. Maybe sharing this will at least serve as a cautionary tale about communication and trust, or the lack thereof. Update. It's been several months since my last post, where I shared the story of my colossal misjudgment that led to the end of my marriage. If you remember, I cheated on my husband Dan, because I wrongly assumed he was planning to leave me. Instead, he was organizing a surprise party for my birthday. Needless to say, things have spiraled down dramatically since then. I wanted to provide an update because the situation has evolved into a tangled mess of legal proceedings and emotional turmoil, and honestly, I just need to vent. After Dan discovered the affair, communication between us completely broke down. He moved out the same day, and we've only spoken through lawyers since then. The divorce was finalized last week, and it didn't go the way I thought it would. Let me explain. Firstly, I never wanted the divorce. I thought Dan was the one who would initiate it because of my assumption about him leaving me first. When he filed for it, I was devastated, even though I knew I had caused it. In my mind, there was still a part of me that felt like this was all some terrible misunderstanding, compounded by my terrible decision to start seeing someone else. The fact that I thought he was leaving was no defense in court, and legally, it didn't matter why I did what I did. Cheating is cheating. The legal proceedings were brutal. Dan was cold and unyielding. He wanted a clean break. No joint counseling. Nothing. He cited irreconcilable differences and requested no alimony payments. That's right, no alimony. I was floored. Throughout our marriage, I was primarily a part-time worker, focusing on freelance gigs while he was the main breadwinner. My financial stability was intertwined with his, and suddenly I was staring down the reality of managing on my own, without the safety net I had gotten used to. During the divorce proceedings, my lawyer argued that Dan's behavior leading up to the affair, his secrecy and unusual hours, contributed to a breakdown in marital trust, which pushed me into the arms of another man. We tried to argue that this misunderstanding, fueled by his actions, should be considered in the settlement. The judge didn't buy it. He pointed out that my actions were a direct betrayal of the marital vows, and that Dan's intention, though poorly communicated, was actually an act of love and commitment, not deceit. No alimony was awarded. The judge decreed that the divorce was the result of my infidelity, and that Dan was not obligated to support me financially after the marriage ended. This part of the ruling hit me hard. Not only did I lose the man I loved over a catastrophic misunderstanding and bad judgment on my part, but I was also now left financially adrift. My emotions were a mix of anger, frustration, and self-loathing. Anger at Dan for not trying harder to make me understand his intentions. Frustration at the legal system for not seeing the nuances of our situation. And an overwhelming sense of self-loathing for being the architect of my downfall. Since the court's decision, I've had to rethink everything. I've picked up more freelance work, and am currently looking for a full-time position to secure some financial stability. The transition has been tough, not just financially, but emotionally and socially. Mutual friends have picked sides, and not many have chosen mine. As for Dan, I hear he's doing well, which is both a relief and a knife to the heart. He's moved on, seemingly unscarred by the ordeal, while I'm here piecing together the remnants of a life I once took for granted. This update isn't a call for sympathy. It's more of a continuation of my cautionary tale about the dangers of assumptions in a relationship and the harsh realities of dealing with the consequences of one's actions. If my previous post was a confession, consider this an acknowledgement of the repercussions that followed. Looking back, I wish I had communicated more openly with Dan about my fears. I wish I hadn't let my insecurities lead me to such a destructive decision. But most of all, I wish I had trusted the man I married to be honest with me about what he was planning. I've learned a hard lesson about trust and communication, one that came at a high cost. To anyone reading this, let my story be a reminder to never assume the worst in your partner. Always talk. Always clarify, and maybe just maybe you can avoid the pitfalls that ended up claiming my marriage and the life I knew. Good Lord, it's been a bit since I've read a confession, and goddamn, I feel like these are always 10 times worse than the husband stories. At least with those, some good lessons get passed on. Anyways, let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. When you subscribe, be sure to click the notification bell.